things kicked off then, thanks first of all for joining. Good afternoon, depending on where it is that you are joining from. We are based here in the UK, so it's 3 p.m. here, but it could be potentially good morning or good evening, depending on where you are. So thanks for joining us. Today, our webinar is going to be around horizon scanning for problems in the food supply chain. Quick introduction of myself. I'm Chris Higgins. I'm the Customer Solutions Manager here at Primority. My kind of core responsibilities is working alongside new and existing clients to make sure that they're getting the best out of our solution, which is called 3i Verify. And one of our new modules and sectors of that solution is around AIScan and how we can utilize artificial intelligence to support us with horizon scanning within the food supply chain and make sure that you guys are protected and that we can pick up on any potential concerns in the supply chain and support you with that. I'm going to pass you over to James, who's our CTO and founder. James is going to take you through a short presentation and touch on a few of the kind of key points and explain some of the background of our solution, and then going to take you into a little bit of a live demonstration, a bit of a run through of the solution in itself as well, and give you a bit of a flavour for what that looks like and what that can do for you as well. Throughout the session, if you notice down the bottom, there is a little button that says Q&A. If you do have any questions, please do put them there. There'll be a point at the end of James's demonstration there that we will do a short Q&A session where I'll put the questions to James to get you some answers today. And then also at the very end there's a kind of introductory offer for any new customers that do wish to sign up with us throughout in the month of February. So a little bit of an insight on that. I'll touch on that at the very end as well. So that's enough for me at the moment. I'll keep an eye on your questions, so please do feel free to ask any question that you like. It doesn't matter when you ask it. I will come back to it at the end, and I'll try and make a note of where it is that you asked the question so we can go back and get you the answer. So please do use that function. But in the meantime, I'll pass you over to James.
Thank you very much, Chris, and welcome everyone from wherever you are, UK, USA, and I think further afield there are some other participants. So what I'd like to do today is really focus in on horizon scanning in the food supply chain, making that relevant, etc. Before I get to that, I'll tell you a little bit more about us and where the solutions come from, and how we got to where we are with everything. So my background is as a food safety consultant. I've got over 27 years experience in HACCP and food safety management systems, etc. I've got the accolade, if you want to call it that, of having designed and developed the world's first Windows-based HACCP Now software in the year 2000, which has just flown in the last 21 years now. I've got a wide range of experience in software development, project management, innovations, and I've worked with assurance schemes such as Red Tractor in terms of running and managing innovation on those systems and so on. So Primority we're a small specialist company focusing on this type of technology to help food and related businesses manage compliance, risk, food safety, quality, and so on. But today we're going to focus in on the supply chain and particularly on horizon scanning tools that we've recently developed. A bit about our history. So the company was actually started as an intellectual property container in 2010 for all the software that I had and have since developed with the purpose of protecting that while I worked as a sort of senior innovations guy in various roles. 2015, one of our key customers came to us, and one of our HACCP Now customers came to us and asked us if we could add in supplier approvals and raw material management into the existing HACCP Now solution. At that time I said, no, we really need to start again with that solution, and that's where our current solution 3i Verify really came from. So it's taken over completely from the older HACCP Now based solution. So our first customer came on board with that in 2016. I'll talk more about some of the customers in a little while. In 2017, we realized that what we'd built was very good for the US Foreign Supplier Verification Program. So we began kind of enhancing our supply chain approvals and monitoring technology around that. 2018, we applied to Innovate UK for some funding to help us develop what you're about to see. We won that funding. 2019, the FSVP side was going very well, so we launched a new business called US Import Agent, which is doing extremely well. That focuses on helping companies export to the US and comply with the FSMA, Food Safety Modernization Act, and also the FSVP Foreign Supplier Verification Programme rules. 2020, we completed our Innovate UK project and launched the beta version of AIScan, and that is really the core of what we are going to discuss and look at today, why that's different, how it helps, and hopefully get some feedback from you guys in terms of where we're at with that. And you know, we're continuing to build this, but what we do is we build based on what our customers' feedback is. So just a flavour of some of the kinds of customers who use our solution to date. They range from people like Weetabix, Park Cakes, who are big UK manufacturers in cereals and bakery, Pioneer Foods also in cereals, and Helios Ingredients, who are a import broker agent. And not just in the UK, we've got around about 25 US-based importers who use our solution for the Foreign Supplier Verification Programme, fishery companies, butchery companies. It's a wide range of customers who work with us. So getting on to the subject matter. So our AIScan solution focuses on supply chain risk, and that can come in many different forms. But what I want to start with is the definition of risk as defined in ISO 31000:2018. So this standard says that the risk is the effect of uncertainty on business objectives, and that effect can be both positive or negative. So homing in a bit more on what that means to the food sector, what are the business objectives? Well, certainly legally compliant food, safe food, high quality food, authentic food, a profitable business, and a growing business. These are all core business objectives in the food industry. But in a food safety context, uncertainty is usually focused on food safety hazards or threats, be they safety, authenticity, provenance, food fraud, food crime, and so on. So this is kind of where we are looking to manage risk. So one key consideration we need to think of is, where do we get data on food safety problems or problems in the food supply chain? So food safety alerts are quite a big source of data. However, the problem with that is that these alerts are all described differently in different locations, using different sort of data structures, if you like, and therefore it's quite difficult to make sense of all of that in a coherent way. And that's one of the core problems. So what events are we talking about? So if any of these things happen in your supply chain with your suppliers, then you're going to be concerned about them. So food safety alerts, allergen alerts, certification expiry, if one of your suppliers has had an import refusal somewhere, regulatory issues, or they're in the news for the wrong reasons. So these are the sorts of starting points that we focused on when we're looking at identifying problems in food supply chains. What are the data sources? So some of the data sources that we are using are FDA, Food Safety Authority of Ireland, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, Food Standards Agency, Food Standards Australia, New Zealand, and also the RASIF system for rapid alerts within the EU. And between these data sources, we have managed to gather information on over 150,000 food companies worldwide, and being able to classify the alerts, but we've applied artificial intelligence to the data from those alerts to identify hazards, problems, trends, and frequency of how often these things happen. I'm going to explain why that's important in a moment. So there's a lot of really useful information that's in these alerts, but making sense of it in the structure that they are, which is usually web pages, is actually very difficult and very time consuming. But artificial intelligence has got basically unlimited time to do these jobs, and can be trained to read and make sense of the information which is in each of these data sources. And that's what we've done with our solution. So some of the alerts pages, these may be familiar to you, and you can see they're all in different formats. They all explain things in a different way. And in the case of RASIF, for example, they do not identify suppliers, whereas the others do. But so it's a difficult job to identify whether any of these alerts relates to your particular supply chain. Of course, we've got product categories and so on, and specific hazards we may be interested in. We'll look at that a little bit later on. So what is a risk event? So we mentioned these kind of key points earlier on. Clearly, if any of these things happens in your supply chain, you're going to want to know about it, and that's a key consideration here. Now, it's one thing knowing that there's a problem in your supply chain. It's a completely another thing to understand what it means to your business. So we have built a configurable risk model integrated into all of this, which allows you to assess the impact of a particular event on your business. A risk event score, which is driven by the performance of a particular supplier and the alerts and incidents that they've had over time, and the ability to set different weightings on different risk events, depending on how important these things are to you. Finally, we've introduced a concept called forgiveness factor. Clearly, something which happened yesterday is much more important to your business than something that happened 5 years ago, and we should take that into account when we're trying to model risk. So I'll be able to show you how we've gone about this shortly when we get to the system. So there are some key principles here that we need to think about, and that is that risk events which happen in your supply chain, whether you know about them or not, have different impact levels, and this impact must be assessed individually. So at some point, someone needs to look at these events and make a judgment call on whether you're affected by this particular incident, and if so, how big, how significant is that? Also, some risk events are more important than others. So a food recall with one of your suppliers for a product or raw material that you purchase from that supplier is clearly much more important than a food recall from a supplier that you do not use. So we need to apply more weight to those. And the principle I mentioned earlier about forgiveness, older risk events are less important than a risk from yesterday. So these are key considerations we need to take into account when we're measuring the overall effect or impact of issues in food supply chains. So if you just give some kind of example on how we can use this, clearly looking at some of these examples here, so the melamine, food fraud, quality and safety issue here, that had a very high global impact because it was a worldwide incident. The weighting has got to be high because it is a food safety issue, and you know, it was found in baby food in China and pet food in the United States, which is how it came to light. But because it was 12 years ago and people are now monitoring for that, the risk, overall risk score turns out to be low because there's a lot of forgiveness involved in that, from that concept. Similar principle with the listeria outbreak in South Africa. The impact of that was high, but it was a national level. Didn't affect very many, if any, outside of South Africa. Very high food safety. A lot of people were dying. Over 200 people died. Forgiveness is low because it was only, well, 3-4 years ago now, and therefore the risk score is high. So there's a way of measuring that. I think you get the idea. Using this type of approach really helps us, potentially helps us make sense of things that happen in our supply chain. So I've been through some of this already, but these are the kind of summary of how we're going to go about measuring impact of events. One thing I'd like to mention before we kind of move on to the next stage here is that, the way we look at the problem of a food safety management system in the food sector is that the supply chain and individual food companies tend to be like this in terms of information flow. So lots of different departments communicating bilaterally with each other. And what we try and do is bring everything together into one common platform where you've got the common language, common data, and everyone's kept aware and up to date of what is going on. So having one integrated food safety operations system we think is very important, and we think that going forward, this is the way to help eliminate issues within food companies and also minimize problems along supply chains. So some key things that we will look at in a moment. So we're going to look at some dashboards and BI reports, particularly anomaly detection, and we'll also look at the AI supplier surveillance tools within 3i Verify. One thing in particular we'll look at is a concept called anomaly detection. So I won't tell you too much about that right now, but this is an example. You're going to see some examples in the solution which help identify where there are things which should be investigated. Because the big problem is when you've got a lot of data is understanding which data you need to be looking at. So we use a technology that we developed called anomaly detection, which was first developed in the aviation sector for stopping planes falling out of the sky, basically, by monitoring anomalies in aircraft flight, engines, vibrations, landing patterns, and all that kind of stuff. So we've applied that to data of the food supply chain so that we can effectively home in on areas of concern that you might otherwise miss because no one's got 24/7, 7 days a week to be able to monitor all of these different data sources. We're also going to look at AIScan, which is a live heat map of these risk events which happen and has this configurable risk model built into it. So what I hope is that you get some ideas here about how this approach can help, and I'm really interested in your feedback as well. Okay, so let's jump over to 3i Verify and we can have a look at how this all works. So before I go in, I'll just say a quick word about 3i Verify. So I mentioned that 3i Verify is a fully integrated food safety quality management system with integrated supplier approvals, raw materials, and also integrated supply chain monitoring. And it's this bit, the AIScan part, that we're going to focus on today. So typically, food businesses are going to manage things like supplier approvals and raw materials through a combination of questionnaires and audits and so on. And this is where you can add suppliers, send questionnaires, run through the approval process, and capture data about the supplier, the raw material, and the properties of that raw material, and so on. So we're going to jump into AIScan, and this is what AIScan looks like. And these are all suppliers which have been added into the 3i Verify system. When these are in the system, what happens is we take the supplier name and we go and look in our global database of companies, and we search for food safety incidents and other risk events that I mentioned earlier, and we then assign a score according to a risk model. So before I delve too much into this, I'm going to show you the back-end data that supports all of this. So here is our part of our control panel where data comes in to the system. And you can see here, for example, these are all the different data sources. So if you look at RASIF, for example, There won't be any company name associated with RASIF because they don't identify companies, but what we do is we take these alerts and we match them with other known alerts which do identify companies. So you can see this is a recent RASIF update with listeria, glass fragments, and so on. And we've got 29,000 entries in here in total for that. And if we look at all, you'll see we've got 39,000 entries for everything from Australia, US, Ireland, Canada, and Europe, and so on as well. So all of this data is basically gathered and then read by our artificial intelligence engine, which identifies product names. It also in the background identifies product categories and subcategories, and it also identifies what the problem is. So that might be a food safety problem, could be a food fraud problem, and so on. And we also index some keywords, which allows us to do really quite in-depth analysis across all of this data. So, and you can see quite a lot of this data is coming in all the time. There's recent data there. So in the context of that, what we then do is you add your supplier into AIScan, and the supplier's data is gathered and linked to our kind of global database of all of these hazards and alerts. And this then starts counting the number of alerts and the number of allergen alerts, any expired certification. So we monitor for BRC, FSSC 22000, and SQF, with more coming soon. And import alerts, for example, or import refusals rather, any citations. So these are mainly FDA citations, but those can be a very good indicator because a lot of companies who supply the UK also supply the US, and because they're quite open about sharing all of this data, that can really help us identify issues. We also have a negative news search algorithm, which will look up routinely. We'll go and look up details of whatever the supplier is and see if there's anything negative about them. So I've got a set of negative keywords and so on. So how do we arrive at these numbers? So in the risk model settings, we set up all of the key factors that we discussed a moment ago. So for example, we look at the impact. You can set the scoring regime for impact, and you can set the color coding there. You can set the risk event score for each of the risk event types. So this works by looking at over the last 5 years. If a particular supplier had, say, 7 safety alerts in the last 5 years, they would get a score of 3, and so on. That process is repeated through allergen alerts, import refusals, regulatory alerts, and so on through here. We then look at each of these risk events, and we can provide a weighting. So how important is a safety alert versus an allergen alert? And that's a sort of a 0 to 10 scale. And all of these numbers are then fed into the risk model calculation. Same here on forgiveness factor. So we might say that we don't want to forgive any of the risk weighted, the risk calculation for anything that's less than 12 months old. But we want to say give a 20% discount, if you like, on the risk calculation for 1 to 2 years old events, and so on and so on. So using this approach, we can really ensure that each of our customers can tailor the risk model to their risk appetite and what's important to you at the end of the day. So key things here about AIScan. You get an overall risk score here, which is calculated using the risk model I just showed you, based on a number of events that have happened and how important you set them to be. You can raise corrective actions in the system immediately and assign those to people so that they can go investigate, log what's done, and make a decision about these things. You can also dig into the actual supplier and bring up their supplier profile. This one happens to be a US company, so we'll just wait for that to load up. You can download and print this. You can view this, this supplier on FDA if they've got an FDA entry in the FDA dashboard, for example. You can also do things like, you know, street view to have a look at the outside of the premises there. And I believe the factory is actually up here. So that's actually the factory there. You can get a breakdown of the risk events that are happening in here and how this score is arrived at. You've got your supplier contacts that come from the system. If they do have any expired certification, that's going to show here, and that will link through to the actual record of audit of that particular. It won't give you the audit, but it will link you through to the last known audit for that particular food company. And then down here, you can see all of the issues which have occurred, and it will tell you the source and you know, the reference numbers. You can go view the source. This will take us, in this case, it will take us to the FDA dashboard. It could just as easily have taken us to RASIF record, an Food Standards Agency record, and so on. So you can see everything that's happened this particular company. So we think this is very important to be able to link all of this back to the source so that you've got trusted, verifiable data. Now, in terms of impact, there will be a default impact score which might be set when a new alert comes in until such time as you assess the impact. And in here, you can then come here and set the impact, set if it's relevant or not, and put a justification here. So this gives you a record proving that you looked at the event, you assessed it, and this will affect the risk scoring number that gets calculated up here. So if you've got a lot of events that are not relevant, then those would be removed from the calculation. So you've got full control over that. So all of these factors feed through to the risk score, which is great for supplier management, but it doesn't really give us a massive amount of detail in terms of looking into the supply chain to see what's coming or what the particular issues might be. So this is where the just over here. This is where the some of the dashboard reporting elements of the solution come from. So what we're looking at here is an analysis of the data which is in our database, and you can do things like break these down by different hazard types, down into actual sub-hazard types all the way down. So all of these kind of sub-hazard types are driven by the artificial intelligence picking all of this data up and allowing us to classify all of it. So what are we looking at here? So on the left here, we've got our anomaly score. I mentioned earlier that looking at the count of food alerts is not really a good measure, because what we want to know is what's different. So what the anomaly score part of our technology does is it looks at newness, uniqueness, and frequency, and some other factors and it puts a number on the particular category that we're looking at here. So we can see here that we've got a really big anomaly score in 2019, and that sticks out like a sore thumb. Whereas looking at the count of food alerts, you would not be able to identify that 2019 was a problem year for one particular thing. This allows us to click on this and then drill down into the actual data. Maybe I need to refresh this 1 second. It's been sitting there for a while. Let me try that again. Okay, so click on the data to drill down, and this then gets us a list of all of the alerts which are in that column of the chart, so to speak. What we can then do is we can order this by anomaly score, and looking down in here, what we can see is there is a couple of, quite a few particular events which seem to be repeated happening over a short space of time, and this has resulted in a very large anomaly score. We can then click into that alert and then see the full detail of this. And this was a huge recall that happened, and it was meat products, E. coli 0157, and you can see the number of products which are pulled back from that. So that's just kind of one example of how anomaly detection can really help with drilling into the data and finding out what is going on in the supply chain. And again, this is just an example BI report, business intelligence report, and we can create any kind of BI report that suits your business, because that's really what we do. We're not an out-of-the-box solution provider. What we do is we work with you to get you the view of the world that you actually need to make sense of in terms of risk and so on. So that's the dashboard part. Behind all of this is our anomaly detection solution. And here, for example, if I set this to all categories, then what we're looking at here is a chart of anomalies for the entire food supply chain according to the data that we've got. And it's quite interesting in that, if I'm just zooming out a little bit. So on the bottom is the count of food alerts. So again, you can see there's a correlation here with food alerts and a lot of anomalies going on here. But over here, you can see that the count of food alerts is relatively low. It's kind of background noise, but we've got a lot of anomalies going on over here. So the interesting thing about this approach is that we can zoom into this and we can say, well, right, okay, so there's a lot going on here. Now let me, so this, for this portion that I'm zoomed into, show me the data. So we can drill into that data and it will bring back all of the issues. So one thing we can see here is that in October, 2,4-dinitrophenol offered for sale is obviously quite a big issue. I believe that is a diet pill of some kind. So it falls into the dietary supplements category. But there was clearly a big spike in people trying to sell DNP in the market, which again is something you might not notice if you're not looking for it. This also then allows us to pick particular categories. So for example, I think if I went with, let's see, herbs and spices, and you can go subcategories and stuff as well in here, but I'm just going to keep this sort of high level. So this is herbs and spices. And again, if we zoom out so that we can see all the data, so I'm just using the kind of scroll wheel on my mouse to do this. So this is from 2012 to yesterday, or today, yesterday. And again, what we can see here is we've got some stuff going on here, but that's in 2015. But actually, we've got quite a lot going on over here in between October and the end of last year. So if we zoom into this part here, what we can see is the anomaly scoring in action. So the way that anomaly scoring is working is it's looking at various what we call data features, and it's calculating an ongoing anomaly score. So if something's very serious or very new or very infrequent, then it's plotting up that score and accumulating over time, and then it's allowing it to decay if the event is fading off. So what we see here is the alert count. It has definitely increased alert count, but that in itself doesn't really tell you very much. But this does. This trend upwards for anomalies has got something going on that we want to investigate, and therefore we can drill into that. And again, you'll see that quite a lot of these issues have come from RASIF, and they're about aflatoxins. So there's a lot of aflatoxin information going on here, and we can order this by anomaly score, and then you can start to see ethylene oxide's a problem, and so on down here. And again, you can drill into categories and look at specifics, so that you can really investigate and visualize from a kind of a data point of view what's actually going on here. So we feel that this technology is particularly useful because the normal way of doing horizon scanning is to have as much data as you can get access to and then start wandering through the forest of data. What we're trying to do instead is to develop anomaly detection so that it can really tell you, I guess, what part of the forest you want to go looking in to be able to find the answers that you want to find regarding both your suppliers and your supply chain, and based on product categories and so on. So the data's there. It's available in our system. It's also available in what's called an API, which means that you can use our data in other systems should you wish to do so as well. And what we're trying to do is encourage people to obviously use our system, but to use the data to to make good use of the data to reduce risks in your own business and also in the food supply chain. So I'm going to stop there for now and hand back over to Chris, who will say a few words and get to the Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Yeah, it's a really nice overview, as always, of the system and some nice examples there as well. So there is just one question that's come in. Guys, here's an opportunity if you do have any further questions, but we'll start off with this one, James. And it's coming in. The question is, can the system collect and monitor the raw material vulnerability, I'm struggling to get that out, and threat to, as currently I do all of that manually, as I'm sure do a lot of people, using various different Excel spreadsheets?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the interesting things about the way that we've built this whole solution is that, as I showed you a moment ago, these dashboard reports, well, these dashboard reports are actually produced in using a tool called Microsoft Power BI. Now, I'm sure you've all heard of Microsoft. You may not have heard of Power BI. But the interesting thing about Power BI is that it can gather data from multiple sources. So it might gather data from, say, 3i Verify's Global Food Alert database. It might also gather data from an Excel spreadsheet you've got somewhere or another data source, and it can bring all of that together into one source and then give you the view that you need. You can sort of think about this as overlaying different different data sources and coming up with a unified picture. It's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle in that point of view. But we've got quite a lot of experience in building these. They're really actually quite easy to build, and we can do it that way. Another way that we can do it is if you have data sources you want to be included, then we can routinely go and get those data sources and bring those in and then provide you with the kind of reporting and alerting that you need. And so the short answer is yes, that's exactly the kind of thing we do. We're not about just an out-of-the-box solution. What we like to do is to give the customer exactly what they need, and to do that in a timely fashion and at an affordable cost.
Great, thanks, James. Yeah, and I think just to echo one of the points you made there at the very end in terms of saving time, I speak to a lot of people who, in terms of trying to do some of this that James has demonstrated here today, can spend an abundance of time, or in a lot of cases, not enough time in doing these tasks. Certainly not as efficiently as artificial intelligence can go and do 24/7. So certainly a time saver, to kind of put all those pieces together. So yeah, but hopefully that answers your question. No other questions have come in, which is fine. It may take a little while for you to think of something, so we can always revert back to it via email at a later time. James, I would just ask you to put back onto the presentation. I'll just cover off the kind of introductory offer or the special offer that we are going to put out there for anybody who wants to sign up with us in February. And as you can see from the screen, some of the numbers there, just to kind of put a bit of background to that. As James said throughout the presentation there, that our solution isn't an out-of-the-box solution. We break our solution down into different modules, and we only really work with businesses to provide them with a system that they want. So they don't have to take all of the system. They don't have to take certain parts of the system. They only work exactly with what it is that they need. So in terms of the AIScan specifically, we just looked at there, we do offer an AIScan bundle, which offers you one AI admin who controls, as James showed you, demonstrated there some of the matrix, and also 2 standard users that may be used for monitoring, corrective action, so on and so forth. Or there's some kind of individual prices broken down there as well. And our offer is a 15% discount for anybody who wants to sign up in February. So, for anybody who does want to have a further conversation about that, maybe have a look at some other parts of the system, or interested, do have any follow-up questions, my email address, James, I think it's at the bottom of this slide, James, if you press the space bar, it should be. Anyway, my email address is ch@primority.com. I'm going to follow up with everybody via email in the next day or so. There it is, the ch@primority.com, and I'm going to follow up with everybody via email in the next day or so. So please do come back to me if you have any follow-up questions, or you would like to have maybe a one-on-one conversation and have a little look at some other parts of the system, and I'd be more than happy to help. But if nobody has any further questions, I'd just like to thank everybody for taking your time out of your day. I know I appreciate how everybody is probably busy right now as well, but I hope everybody had a lovely new year, and I wish you the best for the rest of the week.
Thank you very much also from me, and if you do have any questions, do let us know. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.